Mr. Gregory and I have been working since that time to pen a draft agreement. So it's coming back to the executive committee. I don't know that it was necessarily required to do that, but we thought just in the spirit of transparency, we would bring it back to you. It has not gone to the CBTA yet. So this is an opportunity for the executive committee to review that. It's set up, I think we've talked about this before, but structurally it's set up that PlanRVA would provide this support role to the CBTA for a period of 5 years, renewable. And then each year through the CBTA budget process, they would appropriate the dollars given the scope of work that is necessary for that year. So in this first year, there are 3 kind of generalized buckets of support that we're providing. First and foremost is the hosting of the executive director, and then it provides for, in the future, if there's a need for the CBTA to hire additional dedicated support, then we would have the ability and flexibility in this agreement to do that. PlanRVA will be reimbursed at 100% of the costs associated with housing that executive director. That's salaries, benefits, all employment costs associated with employment would be reimbursed to PlanRVA. We then have 2 other categories of support that we're providing in the form of additional staff support. So as you know, a number of staff members also lend a hand in supporting the technical and administrative needs for CBTA. So we would bill that through on an hourly basis on our regular base, fringe and indirect, plus a 10% administration management fee. And then we also are providing those additional operating assistance costs. So any of those direct expenses that we incur on behalf of CBTA and that get reimbursed at the end of the quarter, that also achieves that 10% management fee. We extend then all of our purchasing infrastructure, all of our legal is billed through directly, but all of our other types of procurement and support services are available to the CBTA executive director. And so again, this agreement outlines that 5-year framework. And then each year through the budget process, we would be able to negotiate the specific scope of work and that what that potential, from this perspective, what the potential revenue offset is to PlanRVA.
Just a question in terms of reporting. So PlanRVA staff continue to report to you, but we are obviously providing services to CBTA.
Yes.
There's no accountability line there, though. Is that right?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Sure. I should have started there. The agreement also does outline that while PlanRVA is the employer of record for the CBTA executive director and any other support staff that may dedicated support staff that may come along in the future, PlanRVA is essentially through this agreement, my words, not the legal legal terminology, but essentially assigning that responsibility for supervision and accountability of the executive director to the CBTA. So performance evaluations, decisions around compensation, all of those activities are the responsibility of the CBTA. We will just simply make sure that the administrative structures are in place as we have done previously to accommodate that.
So will CBTA have any of its own employees other than the executive director? And if so,
at this time, no. Okay. And technically speaking, and I'm glad you're here today because you were the chief architect of this, but the CBTA will technically not be an employer. For example, with like the Virginia Employment Commission, we will be the organization that's carrying those responsibilities. But through this MOU, we are assigning a number of those traditional employer responsibilities to the CBTA, performance evaluation, decisions with regard to compensation. If there were any accountability issues with regard to performance, those would all be handled by the CBTA, and then they would have to advise PlanRVA on how they would like, certain actions. Similarly, if there were to be any kind of a violation of PlanRVA's personnel policy or other administrative procedures, we would, through our escalation structure, report, for example, through our chair. The chair would then report that to the CBTA, and they would be held accountable to address that with the employee. And does the CBTA,
last question. Does the CBTA then adopt PlanRVA's policies in total in terms of personnel policies?
I think one could, but because they're not technically an employer, right. The hope was that through this MOU by both parties signing it, and it's expressly saying that the employee is subject to PlanRVA's policies, but I think legal could advise if there's more that we need to do in that regard to make sure that that's ironclad.
Anybody else have questions on that?
The only thing I'd like to clarify is we spoke about the interaction with the executive director and reporting. I think we need to, and I don't know, I haven't read all this here, so I apologize, but does this account for, let's say, for example, the executive, you provide an employee of yours to say do administrative work, but that, let's say there's issues with that employee. It would be the responsibility of their direct manager to address those issues, not with the executive director. The only time the executive director would is if there was somebody directly reporting to that individual.
Yeah, so I think if I understand you correctly, if one of the PlanRVA employees who is assigned a certain number of hours to provide assistance to the CVTA, if there's an issue with performance in that regard, who holds that person accountable?
Right.
The CVTA executive director.
Or say they want to give them a whopping raise because they do so well.
Yeah, that's true, exemplary performance. The CVTA executive director would report that presumably to me, and we would handle that within our structure to be able to respond accordingly, whether it's an improvement or it's a recommendation.
It's almost like an in-house outsourced.
That's right, yeah.
Does that?
I think we could go back through and just make sure that that's very clearly articulated. I think we speak more to the fact that the CVTA executive director and the PlanRVA executive director would determine what staff support needs are necessary, and that would be part of that budget process, but it doesn't really speak to the kind of evaluation of service. And I think we could go through and add another bullet that speaks to that specifically.
Yeah, and just, so I think where most of the CVTA's head is at, putting on that hat, is that once we get the executive director in, they're gonna help us inform what the needs from a staffing perspective, whether it could be, hey, we'd like to employ more PlanRVA staff, or we'd like staff that's more directly accountable to us. But that's phase 2.7 or something like that, so it's down the road.
Do we want to?
Mr. Chair?
Please, Dr. Newbill.
Yeah, under the remuneration section, do we have any rough idea of what these costs would total?
Yes, let me pull up my chart. Should have that open, sorry. So I've been working on this. We are leaving kind of a blank as far as the reimbursement to PlanRVA for the executive director position, but in many cases that's not really, because it's a one-for-one expense, it's a wash. So it doesn't really matter for, I think, Dr. Newbill, your question. So above and beyond the straight reimbursement for the executive director, it's approximately $161,000. That's just a bottom, like an estimate at this point. A lot of that depends on the timing of the hiring of the executive director, that discussion about what's actually needed. To give you a little bit of a feel, that is reduced from this year and the past year. I believe our contract with CVTA over the last 2 years has been about $210,000. And it also does incorporate some changes to the structure of the way that the reimbursements come in and the cost structure, because we've not been charging rent or facilities fees or things like that before. And so in anticipation of moving into the new space, we've incorporated that into that that budget sketch. So this does fit within the CVTA budget, but again, those are soft numbers at this point because they haven't been part of the agreement.
Sure, thank you. I understand. I just wanted to get some idea of what that amount might be. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions on this item from anyone? So just for the friendly amendment there, do we want to pass this today and then bring that back, or how do you want to handle that, Martha?
Yeah, I really think I wanted to get it in front of you, frankly, for this kind of feedback so that we could do that. So, I mean, we can
table it, bring it back.
Yeah, and I think that'll give members a chance to kind of review it. I wanted to make sure that the executive committee at least was comfortable with it before it went to the CVTA, just so there weren't surprises.
Yeah, the only area where I thought we could just really make sure that we have clear lines is with accountability. So it sounds like that's happened and that's in place.
I think that's the goal of both organizations.
Yeah, I just, can't be too careful on that one. All right. Well, if that's okay, then we'll leave that for the next executive meeting, and then maybe we can make a recommendation after that meeting I'll leave that to Mr. Davis. Very good. And then, so number 5 is our office space update.
Yes, thank you. I'm reporting today on behalf of Mr. Holland. He will be here at the 9 o'clock meeting.
Oh, great.
To share with you all, and Mr. Byerly was in our finance committee meeting yesterday as well. That committee met yesterday to review the status of the project management. As you all know, they've been meeting every couple weeks. You all are welcome to come in if you want. We're just finishing up. The committee last met on June 21st to review the results of the bids for the construction for the new space. Bids were submitted on the 20th, so on the 21st, the committee reviewed the bid tab sheet that just gave the numbers, and they were able to get a feel for a little bit of what the timeline. At that point in time, we had 3 presumed to be qualified bidders. The committee asked staff, because of this amount of the bids, to go back and do some budget bid leveling and determine the apparent low bidder, excuse me, and to work with that apparent low bidder to negotiate down, essentially, to be able to bring the construction budget in line with what had been established by the board back in February. We were able to achieve a number of areas of savings by swapping out certain types of materials, the material of the doors and the door handles, for example, switching out some of the millwork to be a lower grade, things like changing it from like a solid surface countertop to the P-lam laminate countertop, that kind of thing. We were able also to get a little bit more clarity about the equipment that's going into our data closet. And so originally the bid included a dedicated AC unit for the data room. Based on the equipment list that we got and the mechanical engineer review, it was determined that we could actually swap out and have a fan, a thermostat regulated fan and a louver on the door, and that would be sufficient to keep that space cool enough for that equipment not to overheat. So those are the types of changes that we were able to do. We also, outside of the construction budget, were able to make some modifications to our proposed furniture budget. So scaling down pretty dramatically the proposed new furniture that we would be looking to purchase for the new space, really limiting it to the furnishings necessary to outfit the staff that are sitting in that perimeter and the open space seating. So we were able to hold the purchase of the workstations and the chairs and those items there. The other staff offices would be furnished by existing equipment that we furniture that we own. The boardroom would be furnished with the furniture that we own, and we would essentially delay that to future phases of purchases when we felt like we were ready to make those expenditures. All that being said, the construction budget originally was $642,143. That was what was approved back in February. The agreement was that the finance committee was assigned to oversee this project and was authorized to make decisions, provided that all decisions fit in budget and fit in project timeline. Then I think both the chair and the vice chair were appointed to be sort of the liaisons. So that committee has been well aware of that. With the construction bidding and even with this negotiation down, we were in a position where we needed to come back to the executive committee and the full board today. So that, again, the original construction budget was $642,143. The proposed construction budget, based on the revised bidding, is $715,687. That's a variance of $73,500 and some change. The total project budget was $992. This plus some other modifications, because as I mentioned, we reduced the budget for furniture, the construction increases. So as those increases and decreases by a line item, the new proposed budget for the project is $1,031,000. And so that essentially creates a shortfall of $40,000. So the committee did take action yesterday to recommend an amendment to the project budget to increase the contribution from PlanRVA reserves from $257,054.80 to $297,054.80. That's a $40,000 increase from reserves. I see Mr. Hollins here in the back, and also Mr. Byerly's here. I'm happy to answer more questions, but also they could share from the committee. I think the intention is to report this to the executive committee and ideally gain your support so that when it goes to the full commission, it's not just the finance committee, but it's both committees coming forward with this request.
Anyone have any questions for Ms. Heater, or for Mr. Holland, who's, I think.
Well
is
said,
here.
Mr. Chairman. Well said.
Good morning.
Thank you, and Mr. Bowler. Very great presentation.
It sounds reasonable to me, given all the supply chain and other things we've got going on in the world. $40,000 it sounds like, it's pretty close to the vest here. We've kind of tightened it up, which sounds okay. Is there a motion on that from anybody to recommend to the full body approval?
I'll make a motion,
I-
Mr. Chair.
And I would second that, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate the due diligence in terms of looking at utilizing furnishings, et cetera, that we have. I mean, really, really appreciate that work, Martha. Thank you. That kept us at least not more than 40,000 increase.
And Mr. Chair, just
Please,
to
Mr.
add
Byron.
to Dr. Newbill there, I would also thank Ms. Heater and thank Chair Holland for, the guidance with the committee to go back to February and everything that's happened in regards to the escalation of prices, inflation, and so forth, and to come in and be able to work. And I know that you've made sacrifices. The furniture was a huge issue in terms of the dollar amounts, and then the other things that everybody cut on to get to this point. I think 40,000 is very reasonable, considering what's happened over the past few months.
I know all of us in our own localities have seen much higher cost increases for projects, so I'm fairly pleased with that. All right, I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. And then we have the 2023 meeting schedule.
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I may,
Please.
just as a point of reference, I don't know that it's necessary, but I did want to raise the Finance Committee and the report to the full commission will also be recommending then a recommendation to approve a contract with Urban Corps as the bidder. And in talking with Mr. Hefty yesterday, the intention would be that we would issue a notice of intent to award should the board approve that this morning, and then we would go through the regular 10-day waiting period to negotiate the contract and finalize that. But we did want to be able to, in order to keep the project schedule going, we did want to have that be part of the action at 9 o'clock this morning.
They're the ones already in the building, correct?
Yes, that was a happy result. They were the low bidder, and they are the ones that have already done the build out on the 5th and 6th floors.
Okay.
4th, 5th, and 6th.
Um,
Okay, so the meeting schedule, did want to have that before you. It's kind of a two-part requested action today. We did just take a stab at putting together that meeting schedule. It follows what has been traditional for past years. Happy to adjust as you see fit. The executive committee would mirror the schedule for the full commission meeting. The idea being that in August and January, we typically do not meet. In August, to be able to give folks a break for summer, I think a lot of the counties and city also might take some breaks. And then in January, it's helpful, frankly, to not meet just so that we can get our ducks in a row from the organizational meetings that you all have locally and your appointments. I think typically when the board has approved the schedule, we've always reserved the right to call a special meeting if needed, but this helps to be able to comply with the bylaws and keep everybody in tune with what's happening. So the request today would be to have the executive committee approve its schedule and make a recommendation to the full commission to approve the full commission schedule.
You're up, buddy. What do you think of these dates? You good?
Yeah, I saw some of them. The January no meeting, are we sticking, some people had talked about that pushing one back. That's the only one I ever thought about, pushing one back to later in January. But that's something we can do on the fly if there's a consensus. That was the only thing somebody
Okay.
talked about. And I don't have a problem with it, but I mean,
Subject to later change. All right. So is there a motion to approve the executive committee calendar?
so
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we're adjourned till regular
that's what I've got.
5 minutes.